Bitch, I'm back out my coma.
Last year, I made an entire video explaining chronologically how Sony has essentially driven the Spider-Man IP completely off of a cliff since 2018, and how all the issues we're seeing now with their solo villain movies has not only been present since the very beginning, but have somehow gotten worse. TLDR, Sony's Spider-Man movies are vapid cash grabs that are inherently incurious about their source material and are solely made on the basis of tricking both general audiences and hardcore fans into thinking, hey, maybe Spider-Man will show up in this one, only for the movie to kinda give you a pat on the back and say maybe next time to soften the blow when it inevitably disappoints you. Which is made all the worse since every successful entry in this franchise has been released right next to tentpole Spider-Man movies. You know, the ones that people actually want to see. Except, they made more. I purposefully released the first video right before Venom 3 came out because I needed to chunk the videos into two separate things, and a part of me was sure that Venom 3 and Kraven couldn't be so bad that they'd require another video made on them. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Part 1. Where were we again? The state in which we left the spunk was an odd one. Since the release of No Way Home and the financial struggles for Madam Web and Morbius's box office, despite Sony swearing up and down that that one was a success, the studio has been in this weird chess game where they're attempting to ramp up the Spider-Man connections, especially after Venom got to crossover during No Way Home, while also trying to figure out something to do with the universe going forward. Except, the very next movie on the docket is Venom's grand finale. Venom 3 came out in October of 2024 and was the first Venom movie to release completely solo, since the last Spider-Man movie released over a year and a half beforehand. But Sony seemed very comfortable with spending a large chunk of change on the marketing for The Last Dance, going so far as to have merchandise like when they played into the popcorn bucket trend, despite Madam Web financially flopping less than 8 months earlier. I am ashamed to admit that I really wanted the popcorn head. This is more than likely because the Venom series has pretty much cemented itself as a brand that can somewhat exist on its own, and has by far been the biggest moneymaker for Sony as far as spunk goes. Except, like I implied earlier, the subtitle The Last Dance isn't just for fun. Tom Hardy's contract is up. Part 2. Venom's Last Call. So this is the part where I have to talk about Venom 3, Oh my god. So this is the second time after Morbius that I really felt myself avoiding rewatching a spunk movie because I can just remember the exhaustion and disappointment that I felt in the theater. I made that first video and then I went right to the movies only to be thrown right back into the ringer. And I honestly think that this one broke me. So I'm going to talk about positives first because it's a very short list. While the overall story has issues, I applaud writer-director Kelly Marcel for attempting to tie in the greater cosmic parts of the Venom lore, with Null and the Xenophage as the antagonists. It's clear that this movie was written by someone familiar with the character and wanted to play with the concept a bit more than past movies had been allowed to, and I appreciate that. Venom gets to be a horse, a fish, a frog, there's multiple symbiotes at the end, it's fun. On that note, I think that the action set pieces here are legitimately well shot and edited. The massive final fight at the end is one of the best in the spunk, and, at least on a first watch, was genuinely tense. But most importantly for this franchise, I can actually tell what's going on, which is a real compliment at this point. The Sony films are finally willing to embrace gore. Granted, it is PG-13, so you're not going to see anything too much, but I feel like the film is at least a lot more tonally correct for a Venom movie. The Xenophage are intimidating, and it honestly feels like a horror movie whenever they show up on screen. And their sort of blender mouths made for a lot of fun kills, so that was a plus. It's not a surprise that Tom Hardy is always the best part of these movies, and his physical acting is at an all-time high at this point, and his delivery often made me laugh. There's this running joke of Eddie's shoes being taken away that all leads up to this delivery from Tom Hardy that really cracked me up, where he just says, my shoes, and then he pouts like a 5-year-old. That was the one joke that fucking got me really hard in the theater, okay? Venom looks the best that he ever has. His transformations from Eddie to being fully formed are really seamless now. I appreciate that The Last Dance attempts to have more sympathetic characters here and a overall larger cast than just the two main characters, so there's credit for that. But that's all I really got, man. This movie is a mess, and it's sort of the event horizon of every issue that we've ever seen with Spunk, and it honestly starts with the very first real scene of the movie. Going into The Last Dance, it seemed as if the plan was for Venom to still go to New York in order to find his universe's Spider-Man. Or at least that's the last thing that we saw in No Way Home. Except, in The Last Dance, that scene was reshot with every mention of Spider-Man being completely removed. So now the excuse for Venom to go to New York is that he has a murder charge on him in San Francisco, so he has to go to New York to find this judge that he, quote, has a blackmail on, end quote, and said blackmail will somehow get the judge to clear his name. Oh lord. It's so weird that a reference to Thanos can be included and yet a Spider-Man mention in a Sony movie was completely omitted. Why was Spider-Man cut from this scene? What blackmail does Eddie have? Why is this even the explanation for going to New York in the first place? Why does there have to be an explanation at all? We never even get to see the judge in the movie because Eddie gets pardoned by the military at the end. So why is this even here? Clearly this movie had some sort of rewrite. Production was halted during the SAG-AFTRA strike, and maybe during that time, some behind-the-scenes stuff changed that ultimately messed with the concept of the movie. Because boy, even the main plot is so convoluted. The main plot of The Last Dance is that the god of the symbiotes, Null, wants the Codex, which is formed whenever a symbiote or their host dies, in order to free himself from the prison that the symbiotes put him in thousands of years ago. And Venom and Eddie share a Codex because Eddie died the first movie, and oh my Lanta, I'm already falling asleep. Basically, Null sends these alien space tracking dogs to hunt down Eddie and Venom for most of the movie. But they can only find the two of them when they're fully formed into Venom. So it doubles as a way to raise the stakes for this movie and an explanation for why there's less CGI for most of the runtime, so majority of the budget can be saved for the final act. And you know what? Despite the concerning opening, despite the weird, rambly explanation for the aliens hunting down Venom, I was still enjoying The Last Dance at this point. Contrary to belief, I like to have fun at the movies. Tom Hardy's great, Null's played by Andy Serkis. I love Andy Serkis. I've seen Andor, and The Lord of the Rings, and Black Panther. But even with my fun hat on, I eventually became frustrated with this movie, angered even. The biggest problem with The Last Dance is a total lack of consistency and cohesion in story, characters, everything but visuals. If I look at a scene on its own, I can understand what it's going for and even kind of enjoy it. But once you put all of them together, it makes character arcs and story beats look a lot like this. The characters will show up and are given so much free time only to do essentially nothing. Chiwetel Ejiofor's General Strickland just sort of yells at people the entire movie, and it all builds up to him shooting Eddie in revenge for killing one of his soldiers, which does kickstart the third act. But in this 109-minute runtime, that's all he really does before he has a change of heart. He's the secondary villain! Leading up to the release of The Last Dance, there was a lot of build-up for the portrayal of Null from creator Donny Cates, that he's cool and he's gonna be a big deal on screen, only for the character to be in a chair the entire movie. Hey, maybe they were told something other than we saw, at least I hope that's the case. At the beginning of the movie, Venom is initially so scared of both the Xenophage and Null that he immediately went into hiding to prevent being followed by the former, and won't even say the latter's name out loud. This is coming from a character who has never been anything but angry or excited, clearly setting up how dangerous the antagonists in this film will be. And yet, when Eddie and Venom arrive in Vegas, Venom just throws caution to the wind to dance with Mrs. Chen, drawing the Xenophage towards him. And like I said earlier, looking at this scene on its own, I understand the intention behind why Kelly Marcel wrote this scene. In universe, Venom is impulsive and often gets both him and Eddie into worse situations than before. And as a movie, this is the final interaction between them and Mrs. Chen, a character who's been here since the very first film, so it's a fun send-off to her. But in practice, it just feels like we're cramming in some sort of excuse for how the Xenophage caught up to both Eddie and Venom in order to quickly transition to the third act. This is a minor moment in the grand scheme of things, but this sort of writing is all over the characters of Eddie and Venom, as well as the movie as a whole. Their friendship arc specifically feels very muddy. They make it a big point that Eddie has never killed anybody entirely on his own, so when that happens during the river sequence, it's a big deal, and it's played off as such. However, instead of naturally exploring the thread of how much Eddie's life has changed over the past year he and Venom have been together, or maybe focus on their sliding scale of morality, he just jumps right back into the two of them having a massive argument like in Venom 2. Which then leads to these moments where Eddie looks at people living normal lives and is envious of them, and this is where the family comes in, oh god. So, during the second act, after they've already encountered the Xenophage and are now on the run, Eddie and Venom meet this hippie family who's interested in seeing Area 51, with the irony being that not only is there an entire facility of aliens there being kept by Imperium, but Eddie himself is harboring an alien. Yeah, I read Save the Cat. I want to say that I like the family in theory. Given the fact that Anne was just cut out of the movie entirely for some reason, it's nice to see Eddie interact with new characters who are just regular people and aren't connected at all to the symbiote plot. And it seems as if their entire point is that they're written as an image of what Eddie could have if Venom wasn't around. Which does tie back into the first movie when he wanted to settle down with Anne, but he completely screwed that up. So it is a smart way to tie that thread back into the final film as an enticing view of what Eddie's future could be, especially considering that they are in the biggest life or death scenario that they've ever been in. However, this family has way too much screen time, and thematically, it really doesn't make that much sense. If this family represents Eddie's wants, and he's going on another "you've ruined my life" tirade throughout the film with Venom, only for it to end with Venom dying and Eddie moving on happily, I don't think that this comes off as a satisfying ending to a trilogy. I hate to be the guy who asks what's the point when talking about movies, but what's the fucking point? If Venom truly is this parasite that's just slowly hacking away at what's left of Eddie's life, then why do we follow these characters for 3 fucking movies? But the thing is, Eddie doesn't decide to separate from Venom in the end to live a better life. Venom sacrifices himself because that's the only choice that they have left. It's not as if there's this unspoken animosity throughout the movie. They're only separated at the end because there's no other options. So why set all this up? On a second viewing, it feels more like the family and all the lingering looks Eddie has at other people who are married is just setting up to the audience that Venom's gonna die at the end, even though he really doesn't. So again, we're right back to what the fuck is the point? So yeah, thematically the family is kind of a weird inclusion. And they have about 30-ish minutes of screen time. When Martin and his family drop off Eddie in Vegas halfway through the movie, I figured that that was the end of their arc. And I thought, neat. Martin was funny, the scenes of the family dynamic offered a bit of brevity, and I thought the moment between Eddie and not little Peter Parker was adorable. Only the family plays a pretty big part in the third act of the movie because, of course, the entire third act is set in Area 51, since that's where Strickland and all the other main characters are. And why are they here from a storytelling perspective? Of course, they get the satisfaction of seeing Venom and the rest of the symbiotes fighting the xenophages. A sort of twisted play on what they wanted to see. They expected Howard, they saw people being eaten alive, there's a laugh there, and that's it. Eddie saves them and they're transported back to their van safely. Except there's this moment of Martin helping kill a xenophage with a rocket launcher that's initially played as heroic, only to revert right back to being a joke, and then the family is finally able to exit stage left. And yet, I'm still sitting here asking, why the fuck are they here? The only answer I can really come up with is that they're simply there to make Eddie look more like a hero and to offer more laughs. And if that's the real answer, then that's not very satisfying, much like the movie itself. And also, it's obvious that the casting of Rhys Ifans as Martin seems like another covert marketing move to get butts into seats, since he's primarily known to Spider-Man fans as the Lizard in the first Amazing Spider-Man movie in 2012, which is weird considering that Ifans just returned to that role in No Way Home, not even 2 years before The Last Dance, and yet that's never mentioned in any interviews that I was able to find. It's just really funny to me that a couple years ago, this studio had the gall to punish Keaton's Vulture by banishing him to this universe, and it refused to make that mistake a second time. So much so that none of the interviews will ever bring up that this is Ifan's third Spider-Man movie. I need you to understand that this is like if trailers for WandaVision showed Evan Peters in their promotional material as a way to draw you in. There's a reason that was kept as a surprise for the show, both because it works as an in-universe sitcom joke as if he's a guest star, but also because it made it hurt less when the whole thing fell flat on its face.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner.
Showing Rhys Ifans in all the trailers as if he's this important character, only for his and every other family member's roles in the movie to be entirely meaningless, makes me very angry. Granted, it doesn't help that there were leaks that the son was a young Peter Parker, and that the ending would have been a time jump where Tom Hardy gets to meet Tom Holland. In retrospect, those leaks are too good to be true. But disappointment from those leaks aside, the end product is still a jumbled mess. A significant portion of the film's runtime is dedicated to setting up this character, Dr. Payne, played by Juno Temple, who's a symbiote scientist who works with General Strickland for Imperium. She gets this tragic backstory of how she became partially paralyzed by a lightning strike that also happened to kill her brother. There's all these scenes of her in the lab talking to Detective Mulligan or just doing scientist things, only for her to spend like 2 seconds speaking to Eddie before the third act begins and characters start dying off. Because she's not really a character for this movie, she's a backdoor spin-off protagonist. At the end of the movie, when all the symbiotes are protecting Venom from the xenophages, Dr. Payne also gets a symbiote at the end. But instead of her transformation being very quick like everyone else's, since their symbiosis is mostly temporary, she gets an entire transformation sequence, giving it so much plot significance. The flashback of her brother dying even plays again, in case you forgot it. It's so clear that she's being set up as some sort of hero for a follow-up. Which would be fine if she at least did something interesting in this movie, or did anything significant, which she isn't, and she didn't. Once she saves her coworker, nicknamed Christmas, yeah, she's called Christmas because she has a Christmas pin. Once she saves Christmas, the camera fades to black with absolutely no resolution for her character whatsoever. All we know is that she's got a symbiote. Is it gonna slowly kill her? Is she gonna become a hero? Find out never. Hence the backdoor pilot insult. Her character is entirely separated from the main story and ultimately never ties itself back in a meaningful way. It's like that episode of The Nanny that's set in a beauty salon. But that brings me to the finale of Venom: The Last Dance. I have to preface that in the past decade or so, there's only been 2 times where I've ever laughed out loud in the movie theater at an inappropriate time. The first was at multiple parts of The Rise of Skywalker, and the other is the entire ending of Venom: The Last Dance. After both Strickland and Venom sacrifice themselves to kill the xenophages, the movie ends with Eddie waking up in a hospital bed, where some army general who we've never seen before explains to Eddie that Venom's dead, all of his crimes have been forgiven, and he's never allowed to speak about what he saw at Area 51. And then, I shit you not, Memories by Maroon 5, I'm actually gonna start fucking laughing. Memories by Maroon 5 begins to play over footage of Eddie Brock walking through the sidewalks of New York, and to add insult to injury, a montage of the past 3 movies starts playing, most of the footage of which is from The Last Dance, only to constantly cut back to a stern, exhausted-looking Tom Hardy. And then the movie ends with an awkward shot of Eddie looking at the Statue of Liberty, since Venom wanted to see it before he died, and then the movie fades to black. Oh my god. If you couldn't tell, that ending was the result of a reshoot, one that took place in August of 2024, just 2 months before the film was released, well after principal photography had already ended in late February. So the obvious question, why? Well, it's the exact same culprit that each of these movies have fallen victim to. The Spider-Man. Except this time, it's a bit more complicated. Part 3. To null or not to null? So I have to ask, why would you introduce Null in Venom's final movie? It's not that I think that character can't be done well on film, but I understand that he's a cosmic level threat, well surpassing villains like Thanos, meaning he would need a lot of build-up, which is why the movie ends with Null leaving his chair in a post-credit scene. But if this is Tom Hardy's last movie, and Null needs a Thanos-like build-up, why would you introduce him at all? Well, this is where the development of Venom 3 and Spider-Man 4 begin to overlap. Oh boy. So the big reveal was that Sony's proposed plan was for Null to play a major part in not only Venom 3, but Spider-Man 4, and would be the catalyst for not only that film to be another multiversal Spider-Man movie, a la No Way Home, but build up to a Spider-Man and Venom team-up movie. I'm so fucking tired of this at this point, man. Like, anything hinting at Venom and Spider-Man crossing over now just pisses me off at this point. For a long time, Sony's plans for Spider-Man 4 were completely up in the air, changing from a possible street-level movie with rumors of Black Cat and Daredevil being involved, only to eventually become a multiverse movie, probably because executives saw No Way Home's box office draw and just yelled, "Encore!" To be fair, these are just rumors and speculation, but one, it is being released between Doomsday and Secret Wars, so Sony could have used that as an excuse to do another multiverse movie. Two, I wouldn't put it past Sony to try and tap into a financial market solely in pursuit of profits, regardless of the quality of the finished product. I mean, do you remember what video you're watching? And three, just look at the fucking movie. The judge explanation for why Eddie wants to go to New York that never plays a part in the finale, the ending of Null looking at the audience and saying, "Hey, I'm gonna be in a sequel," despite everything else pointing at this franchise being over. Yeah, there's a few different directions Sony could take with Venom. Either Flash Thompson, Dr. Payne as Agony, or even the Venom cockroach tease at the end. But all of those scream like executives trying to keep the franchise on life support. I'm telling you, man, it's done. It's over. Let it die. And someone at Sony must have felt the same way, because this entire alleged plan was allegedly scrapped at the last second. Allegedly, which would explain why this film's ending was reshot a mere 2 months before its release. Around the same time, Spider-Man 4 finally secured a director, Destin Daniel Cretton, and not long later, would end up going in an entirely different creative direction with a rumored rewrite. And I am oh so very thankful. Not only because the original plan sounds like it would just continue Sony's song and dance of Spider-Man showing up any day now, but because it wouldn't have done Noel any justice either. I'm glad that his creators were satisfied with what they saw in The Last Dance, and full credit to Andy Serkis for a good performance, but while Noel might sound and look like his creators imagined, he didn't do anything! I promise that you'd get the same level of importance if it was just a cutout of Andy Serkis' face on a fucking popsicle stick, and I hardly think that that would have changed in a sequel or a spin-off, or God forbid, a crossover movie. Oh, but just you wait, it gets worse. In December of 2024, amid Spider-Man 4 rewrites and Kraven's theatrical release, Variety published an article refuting speculation that Sony was canceling their Marvel franchise due to the dwindling box office sales. But besides all that, it has what is potentially the biggest reveal ever regarding Spunk. According to a source at Sony, the studio has had free reign to include any Spider-Man whenever they wanted, whether it was Tom Holland or not, just as long as the movies were not called Spider-Man. When I read that at approximately 7:41 a.m., I think a part of my soul shit itself. The excuse the studio gave is that it feels as if audience wouldn't accept seeing Holland in the Spunk since he's in the MCU and there's all these rules about multiversal travel. Really? Because you were fine breaking those for fucking Morbius? If I am reading this article correctly, essentially, all of these movies, every single installment in this fucked up franchise has been made worse. Their stories have been actively cut off at the knees solely to maintain the brand integrity of the Tom Holland movies. Granted, this could be the result of Disney and Sony's revised deal in 2019, even though the article phrases this as if it was possible all along. There was the rumor of Tom Holland's cameo in Venom 1 being cut out. But regardless of when Sony obtained the free will to include a Spider-Man, the article comes to the exact same conclusion I came to in my last video. Just hire a new guy! Do you know how many brunette twinks want to dress up as Spider-Man on camera? I just can't imagine for the life of me that a movie like Madam Web hiring Tom Holland or any other actor to play Spider-Man would cost more than the copious amounts of ADR and reshoots to tell a Terminator story about Spider-Man without the man in question. I have no fucking clue why film studios want to introduce the multiverse and do experimental shit only to get scared of grandma and grandpa getting confused and just end up restricting their projects creatively. And what we've been left with is this weird limbo where audiences are still left thinking that Tom Holland is the Spider-Man of this universe or will be eventually. So Sony has essentially just screwed themselves over willingly, simply in order to keep their bratwursts as far as they can from their gas station hot dogs. Although that's not really a good analogy because I like gas station hot dogs. It's insane that actors like Tom Hardy seem to be obligated to continue this farce until their contracts are up, where they then just put the entire process on blast. Essentially, due to this source, we have confirmation that Sony sees the Spunk, SSU, whatever the hell, as a bunch of B movies that just so happen to make them money for a while. Except now, the well is dried up. So what does a post-Venom Spunk look like? It's not good. Part 4. What do you do with a Kraven movie? To be fair, Kraven was a part of the first wave of films to be put into production following Venom 1, all the way back in 2018, and just ended up getting constantly delayed until its December 2024 release. But more than likely due to the changes that happened throughout production, it still somehow feels like a course correct. Because at this point, Sony's reluctance towards risk has taken over entirely. Kraven's got an R rating like people expected from the Venom movies. Instead of opening in 4,000 theaters in the US like Venom The Last Dance did, Kraven only opened in 3,000. This movie didn't get a big marketing campaign or popcorn bucket. Sorry to people who wanted Aaron Taylor Johnson's head to eat kernels out of. While most big budget movies usually stay in theaters for a normal 4 to 5 weeks, Kraven was thrown onto digital on-demand storefronts by January 10th, not even a full month from the film's theatrical release date. All signs point to Sony not having faith in this movie whatsoever, which is understandable following the performance of the last 2 non-Venom movies, one of which released that February and did not do very well. Yeah, don't forget that this is the 3rd Spunk movie to release in 2024, and it's an R-rated action movie released during Christmas? Even the media coverage and marketing around this movie went in a different angle. Some people have pointed to Sony releasing the first 9 minutes of the movie online as a sign of them having no faith in it whatsoever, but that's something that they've done with every Spider-Man movie since The Amazing Spider-Man 2. No, the big difference is that the director, J.C. Chander, made it very clear in an interview that Kraven would not be like the other girls, claiming that this film has learned the lessons from failures like Madam Web and Morbius, which coincided with reports from early reviews that there's no post-credit scenes in this movie and Spider-Man isn't even hinted at here. So that begs the question, what do you get when you make a Spunk movie without any of the Spunk-isms? And it's obvious. You get a bland superhero movie. Now, I will say that this is the first time since Let There Be Carnage that I just didn't see one of these movies in theaters, and that's solely because Venom 3 was so bad, so disheartening and offering any sort of enjoyment by the end that I completely avoided Kraven altogether. I didn't even watch any coverage of it online. I just ignored that this movie ever existed, and thank God, because if I saw this on opening night, I probably would have spontaneously combusted. Kraven the Hunter is all about Sergei Kravinoff, who hunts people, mainly criminals who also happen to hate animals, and both him and his little brother Dmitri get wrapped up in their father's crime business with a rival group run by Alexei, aka the Rhino. There are some small parts that I liked about the Kraven movie. Whenever the movie is allowed to shut up and just slow down, Aaron Taylor Johnson's charisma is able to finally come through. He brings a certain likability to Kraven, despite how shallow he's written, but even Taylor Johnson can't save this movie like Hardy could with Venom. And the same goes for Russell Crowe, Ariana DeBose, and the rest of the star-studded cast here. Because Kraven the Hunter is so restrained on what it could be, so aimless on where to go, that it just ends up as a filler dad action movie that, had it released in 2015, would have been exclusive to Redbox. Every creative choice that's sensible is directly counteracted by whatever the fuck this is. I actually liked seeing Kraven's origin in the first act. We're given the opening scene to learn about Kraven's powers and his moral compass, only for the flashback to give context as to why. His father is an asshole crime boss who mistreated and isolated Sergei and Dmitri's mentally ill mother until she ultimately ended her life, maintaining a part of the character that even some other modern interpretations are very apprehensive to adapt. So overall, I was fine with the flashback, and once Sergei got attacked by the lion, I thought that we'd get back to the actual movie, but then it just kept going. The first 30 minutes of Kraven, out of its 127-minute runtime, is just a flashback setup for the rest of the origin, because of course, the whole movie is an origin story on how he becomes Kraven the Hunter, and not about Kraven the Hunter, which I feel like is the last thing you want to do for the 3rd time in a fucking row. We spend the entire first act almost completely disconnected to these characters, and especially for general audiences, disconnected from the action, for a flashback that eventually culminates in showing Sergei's first murder and why he feels like he has to protect animals after stopping this group of poachers. But Isn't that already the fucking purpose of his father's character? That's why he's a hunter as well, and he uses guns and doesn't really care about the process or the animals at all. As a matter of fact, Sergei only interacts with a couple other animals throughout the movie, so why is this set up as the crux of the entire fucking character? Once we get back to the present day, it's marginally better since we finally get to focus on Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who does have on-screen chemistry with Ariana DeBose's Calypso, a character who was also set up in that origin flashback for like 2 seconds. Simply so she can have this potion to give Kraven his powers, and then have the same potion to save Kraven from certain death in the third act. I promise you, that is all she does in this movie. She's similar to Martin from Morbius, where she has little to no character whatsoever, and outside of her one main contribution to the plot, she's just written as the supportive girlfriend. The actual plot isn't much better. Alexei... God, I love Alexei. I like how both times Sony decided to adapt the Rhino, they were afraid of him just being a guy who likes to dress as a rhino, so they just make him batshit insane. I love how much Alexei chews up the scenery. That one scene of him screaming is probably the funniest joke in any one of these movies. It's funnier than my shoes in The Last Dance, man. However, the film also tries to make him a legitimate threat, with entire scenes of him intimidating people, and I just cannot get this image out of my head, so it's not really working here, boss. It doesn't help that Alexei's constantly asking every Kraven off to be his partner for some fucking reason, and it just gets kinda sad, like a child asking every nearby adult man if they're his father. His entire plan is to get a Kraven off, any Kraven off at this point, to become his business partner so they can rule the underworld or something. And if they don't, he'll kill Dimitri, who's just been sort of a nondescript wimp the entire movie. His entire character is that he's abandoned by Sergei and left to be the only one dealing with their father growing up, leading to him building a need for his father's approval, as well as a secret disdain for Sergei as an adult. And had this been a more nuanced movie, the character of Dimitri and this entire fractured family plot would probably work a lot better, and could honestly work as the main plot of the movie. Except, Russell Crowe is playing a supervillain. Not actually, disappointingly enough, but Nikolai Kravenov is so evil that he doesn't mourn his wife at all. He gets upset at his children showing emotion for her passing, and right after he tells them that their mother's dead, he takes them out hunting so that they can be men. That's how shallow of a character he is. He is a caricature of a caricature, with absolutely no depth in there. And despite being the catalyst for the entire movie, Nikolai completely disappears for the second half, only for the ass pull of a reveal at the very end that he was apparently behind everything. And by this point, I was already bored of the movie. The Rhino only shows up in the final 20 minutes, and the fight only lasts for about 2 of those. The action scenes are pretty alright in this movie, that one was not great. Kraven somehow goes beyond just bad ADR, and had digitally replaced lips and eyes to create the most uncanny thing I've ever seen in a comic book movie. The worst part is that the line Calypso says isn't even important to the scene.
Look at what you became.
You can cut out this little section of the movie and nothing is lost. Whose idea was this? The big selling point was their R rating, but all the kills are cut away from so fast that you could fool me that it's PG-13, if not for the intermittent swearing. So once Kraven killed his dad, I was ready to do anything else with my life. I liked the reveal that the brother was the chameleon. It was set up pretty obviously throughout the movie, although saving him for a sequel is a bit gutsy. However, it's the final moment that just made me lose my shit. Before Nikolai died, he left a gift for Kraven, which is a vest his dad made him out of the lion that attacked Kraven as a child. And Kraven, for some reason, wears it, and the movie plays it like a triumphant moment that it cuts to black. What the fuck? We know why he wore it. It's because the comic did it. But this makes absolutely no fucking sense for this version of the character at all. Again, had this been a more nuanced movie, I could have bought that Nikolai was complicated and, while an asshole, did love his boys deep down, and maybe even a part of Sergei regrets killing his father, so he wears it as a way to keep him with him or something, except No! It's set up early on in the movie that Nikolai gives his children things as a way to get them to both incentivize him to do what he wants and to get them to forget how shitty of a dad he is. And Kraven sees right through that when his father tries to give him the head of the lion that killed him. It's the same thing! So why did he take the fucking vest at the end? Also, I went through this entire section of the video without ever mentioning the other main villain, the Foreigner, a Spider-Man villain that, credit to Sony, I had no clue ever existed. And to be honest, if this is anything like he is in the comics, that's for a good reason. He hypnotizes people and then shoots them. Big whoop. I think this is almost as bad as Morbius, since that was a movie that, despite predatory marketing, was at least equally as uninterested in itself as I was while watching it, but Kraven is almost begging for you to look at it and love it, and I was so bored. I can't blame the cast of the movie, and I can't really blame Chando for directing the movie either. It got him his self-written project funded by Sony, so good for him. I honestly can't blame anybody who works on these movies. The lights must stay on. What's so upsetting is that the movie is so scared to make Kraven antagonistic to anyone who isn't the scum of the earth that what could be a morally complex character is instead flattened to a do-gooder who just thinks he's the Punisher, which is uninteresting as a Kraven movie, especially considering that we literally got Spider-Man 2 just a year beforehand and that Kraven is so fucking good. It's uncompelling as a movie that's characterizing him as this vicious killer, but it's also concerning on a franchise scale. Initially, the big excuse for the solo villain Sony movies was that we watch anti-heroes who fight worse villains who will eventually team up to fight the Spider-Man. But looking at them all, that was never the case. You're all good guys! And that just cements that Spider-Man could have never worked in this universe whatsoever. Because what the hell is he gonna do? Argue with Kraven about paying his taxes? I titled this section, "What do you do with a Kraven movie?" because it's a question I can't even answer myself. The movie somehow had scrapped concept art for a dead symbiote planet, so it too somehow would have tied into the plans for Null, but I have no clue when or why that was cut. And honestly, as bad as that is, I probably would have loved to see that in the final product, solely because I would have been interested in something on screen. Somehow we've reverted back to the 90s era of superhero movies that are incredibly inaccurate and, more importantly, not enjoyable movies to watch. Not all of them, mind you. I love you, Batman Forever. Kraven's MO was spunk without the spunk stuff, and the end product is the most forgettable piece of superhero media I've watched in years. Part 5. Back to formula. So, a lot has happened to the various Spider-Man film franchises in the 6 months following Kraven's release. Spider-Man 4 is now back to being a street-level movie, the villains were even leaked during the creation of this video somehow, and it's now subtitled Brand New Day. My favorite storyline. Beyond the Spider-Verse secured a release date. It finally has screenshots now. Just don't look at Shamik Moore's Twitter. The Silk Show was canceled because creator Dan Slott declined joining the writer's room in order to make space for female and Korean writers, which Sony responded by just imploding the entire show. Okay. And the spunk has been all but put on ice after Kraven flopped at the box office. So Sony's finally learned their lesson. They put their hand too close to the stove and lost millions of dollars. Except no, not really. I'm inclined to believe that nobody at Sony ever cared about these movies. Without incriminating myself, I will say that obtaining the proper footage for this video may or may not have been the easiest process of my entire career, almost as if Sony themselves don't really care anymore if these movies were or were not obtained properly, because I don't think that they ever did. These movies were often an easy way for filmmakers, writers, and actors to pay off debts, or, in some worst cases, were so uninformed about the source material that they thought they were going into the MCU. Bless their heart. Sony was never running 3 concurrent Spider-Man film franchises. They were running 2, along with a grift to just generate more money. And believe me, once Brand New Day or Beyond the Spider-Verse releases and makes a shit ton of cash, they will find a way to do it again. People will say very clickbaity things like, "Oh man, the MCU is dead," when the real problem is a systemic issue with how these films are made that is slowly cannibalizing the industry that, left entirely unchecked, can easily hamper both the art form and the artists who make it. It's easier to say Madam Web bad than it is to say that Sony has put an insurmountable amount of money into a character for 20 years, and yet, still, somehow has little to no understanding of who Spider-Man is, what makes him important, and how to make more than just 3 films based on him before the whole franchise falls apart. And since firing or pissing off every single creative who's ever wanted to work in that franchise has simply resorted to taking your love and familiarity with the character, be it casual or not, and dangling it in your face like car keys, or like content that can be passively consumed, keeping you satiated for whatever's next, only to be thrown in the garbage when it no longer serves its purpose.
Check out my Trix yogurt.
Cool. Oh, very cool.
Watch out! Look! He's got our Trix yogurt!
Well, don't just stand there. Let's follow him.
Now Trix Yogurt features a new Spider-Man 3 action spinner where you control the action.